Another episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast, and another year that the American Elasmobranch Society has put up another Eugenie Clark recipient. The sixth winner of the Eugenie Clark recipient is on the podcast today. Dr. Grace Castleberry is joining us on the podcast today to talk about sort of like her rise in what she's been able to do and accomplish already as a postdoctoral student with University of Massachusetts at Amherst. We're going to talk about her career. We're going to talk about what she wants to do later on, but she's already done so much in her career. We've got lots to talk about. So let's get started with the show. Here we go. Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Luen, with your co-host, Dr. David Ebert. Dave, this is the sixth recipient of the Eugenie Clark Award. This award is not given out lightly. This is going to be an exciting interview to do. What are you looking forward to this time?
We're looking forward to hearing about Grace's journey, what she did, what she's done on her journey to receiving this award this year. As it says, it's one of the most prestigious awards that the American Elasmobranch Society gives. She's only the sixth recipient of it. And, it's given to, a person who shows a lot of the stuff that Eugenie Clark did as a person, which was uncommon perseverance, dedication, and innovation in biological research and public outreach on elasmobranchs, sharks and rays. And I'm really looking forward to it. I don't know Grace well, but I'm really looking forward to hearing her story about her journey. She's worked with a lot of amazing people in her short career. Really, should be an early career person, and we'll get into that with people like Greg Skomal, among others, and some of the different species she's worked with. So I'm really looking forward to today's interview, Andrew.
Yeah, it's going to be a blast. I'm looking forward to it as well. So let's get into the interview with Dr. Grace Castleberry. Enjoy the interview, and we'll talk to you after. Hey, Grace, welcome to the Beyond Jaws podcast. Are you ready to talk about elasmobranchs?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Andrew.
You bet.
Yep.
You bet.
Well, we want to welcome everybody to another episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast, where we have another rising star in the shark research world, the fabulous Dr. Grace Castleberry. Grace is the sixth recipient of the American Elasmobranch Society's Eugenie Clark Award that is given to the early career female scientist who demonstrates uncommon perseverance, dedication, and innovation in biological research and public outreach on elasmobranch fishes. The Eugenie Clark Award is also supported by the Save Our Seas Foundation, which has been an early supporter of the podcast. Grace is a fisheries biologist and an American Association of Underwater Women postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, where she studies the spatial ecology of multiple shark species, shark predator-prey dynamics, and the effect of catch and release angling on striped bass, interestingly. Grace has research interests is at the intersection of marine animal movement, particularly migratory fishes, with a fisheries management angle. Prior to receiving the Clark Award, Grace was the recipient of numerous other awards, including the American Postdoctoral Research Leave Fellowship, the Samuel Gruber Award for Best Student Oral Presentation for the American Elasmobranch Society, the Emily Klein Award for Exemplary Service and Scholar from the NOAA Sanctuaries, and the Dr. Nancy Foster Scholarship, also from the NOAA Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. Her schooling background, she did a Bachelor's of Science degree at the University of Connecticut, Ecology and Evolutionary Biology, a Master's of Science from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and she did her PhD there as well, just finished receiving her PhD in 2023. She did her Master's and her PhD under the guidance of Andy Danilchuk, hopefully I pronounced that right, and Greg Skomal, who's a good friend of the podcast, and Greg's been on the podcast a couple of times. As I mentioned, Grace is currently a postdoctoral research at the Department of Environmental Conservation from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And with that, Grace, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for having me. I feel very special to have all that list.
Well,
Sounds like I actually did something.
You are very special, very accomplished, very, very accomplished. And so, Grace, we'll start off with all our guests. How'd you get interested in sharks and in the marine environment and marine science in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like I have a little bit of a different trajectory towards getting into sharks. I'm not one of those kids that was obsessed with sharks when they were really little or saw Jaws and had it change their life the way my advisor Greg did. So I grew up coming to Cape Cod, Massachusetts every summer to spend time with my grandparents, and my grandpa would always take me and my mom fishing. And so I really developed a love for the ocean by fishing with my grandpa and going to the beach with my family at Cape Cod, but I didn't know that like you could have a job studying fish until a lot later on. So when I was doing my undergraduate at UConn, I took a fish biology class from a professor named Eric Schultz, and I just thought it was so cool that you could go fishing for fun and also then make that your job studying fish. And through his class, I started learning about tagging and tracking technologies for a paper that was assigned. And I just thought that was amazing. I got really interested in movement ecology and wanted to do that for graduate school, but I had no experience with it. And so I applied for a bunch of internships, from tagging turtles and marine mammals to doing stuff with sharks. And the shark one is the one that I got. I ended up going to be an intern at the Panama City Nymphs Lab with John Carlson and Dana Bethea. And I knew nothing about sharks when I went there, other than they were a thing that was big enough that you could put a tag on. And I thought tags were really cool. And so that was the beginning of me falling in love with sharks and getting to do field work with them. I fell in love with being in the field, and I haven't looked back, and I've managed to stay with sharks ever since. So I'm very grateful for that.
Oh, that's super interesting. So when you were doing your undergrad and you kind of got interested in marine science, what kind of led you to UMass? What was of all the places you thought about? You obviously went to Panama City, got some experience there, and sort of what kind of led you to decide to go to that university?
Yeah, so I had been looking around for kind of the right combination of project that I was excited about, which was I really wanted to do movement ecology, particularly acoustic telemetry. My master's was all acoustic telemetry, and my dissertation also had several acoustic telemetry chapters. And I loved the work that I was doing in Florida. I didn't totally love living in Florida. My family is from the Northeast. I wanted to get back closer to family if I could. Though I didn't grow up in Massachusetts, like I said, Cape Cod, Massachusetts is kind of my marine scientist origin story. And so all of those things kind of came together through connections that I made with Andy through the professor that I worked with at UConn. And then I also did an internship for Greg Skomal shortly after I graduated from UConn. And so Andy and Greg had worked together in the past on some projects. Andy has done a lot of different big marine fish work. He largely focuses on recreational fisheries, but he also used to be at the Cape Eleuthera Institute, which did a lot of shark research. And so Andy and Greg were kind of the perfect combination of, there was a project that I was really excited about, which was acoustic telemetry in Buck Island Reef National Monument in St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And there was funding, and it was in a place where I thought I could be really happy living. And so that's what brought me to UMass Amherst. And I've obviously very much liked it because I've been there for a while now, stayed for 2 degrees, and now a postdoc.
Well, let me ask you this, because, I'm just looking at, you sent us your CV before we did this episode, and I'm looking at the time where you graduated from your BSc, in 2013, and then going back to do your master's in 2020. So a good 7 years in between that. Was that done on purpose? You just hadn't found, were you planning on doing graduate work, or were you just sort of working, you were able to get jobs and you were enjoying those jobs as it was? What made you go back and do a master's after that?
Yeah, so that timeline is a little bit deceiving. I only spent 2 years out in the working world before I went back to graduate school. So gotcha. I started my master's in 2015. So I was at the Panama City lab working on the Gulf Span survey, which is a fishery independent shark pupping and nursery survey, as well as the small-toothed sawfish survey that they do in the Everglades for about 2 years before I found that sort of right combination of advisors and project and funding and place. And then I always knew that I wanted to do a PhD, but I was finding with a lot of people that I was talking to about graduate school that a lot of professors seem to really prefer you to at least start as a master's student and then transition into the PhD program. And so that was sort of how I started out there. In 2018, I got the Dr. Nancy Foster Scholarship from the NOAA Office of National Marine Sanctuaries to fund PhD work for me, which was an entirely different project in a different study site than where I was doing my master's. But the way that the funding package made most sense was for me to roll that master's degree into my dissertation. And so my master's was awarded when I passed my comprehensive exams in 2020.
Okay. Okay, I see. Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. I like that. Now, you mentioned too that you always wanted to do your PhD. And I find that happens with a lot of students when they start to do graduate work. They're like, oh, I'm going to do my MSc, then I'm going to do my PhD. Was that just something of a personal goal of yours, or did you think like this was going to help you stay in, like you want to stay in the research side, so you were going to get a PhD, or you just like, is this something like a personal thing, or you knew for professionally you wanted it?
I would say probably a mixture of both. So yeah. I worked in a lab as an undergraduate and worked very closely with 2 PhD students, and I just thought that their life in grad school looked really fun, which I feel like most people don't say, but I loved the fact that they were able to, be conducting their own research projects. I was really excited about being involved in research, and I wanted to be able to have those skills where I could conceive a project, chase the funding, go out and do the project, and then analyze the data, write it up. I wanted to be able to have all those skills where I could go from step 1 to the end of research. And I knew that at the very least, I would need a master's to be able to do that. And that PhD would probably be the step that I needed to be able to really pursue that as a career path. As a graduate student, I've also come to find that I really enjoy the teaching and the mentorship aspects of being in academia. And so as I was pursuing my master's, I just became more sure that the PhD was probably the next step that I wanted to go to, and hopefully ultimately having a professor position where I can have my own lab and have that mixture of the research and the mentoring and the teaching all combined.
Gotcha. How did you get on to, we've had John Carlson on recently, and Megan Winton and Ivy Barrymore, who all were involved with the NOAA Panama City program. How did you happen to hear about it?
Oh, that's a great question. I think maybe I just found them on Google. I don't think I knew, because I really didn't know anyone in the shark realm. I had been talking to Dean Grubbs at one point about graduate school, so there's a possibility that he had mentioned them to me. I can't remember. I think I just was Googling internships, and they have a pretty well-established internship program.
Yeah, I know we talked about in some of our recent episodes we had on. It's a really good program, and I know I had several students from that came through my lab. Their masters came from the program there, and we talked a little bit about how when you have an opportunity to get into a program like that, it could really be a big benefit to you, because it's it can help you, because the program's well known. Students that come out of there are very good. I had several come through. Megan Winton was one of them. But I had a few others, and it's just a good program. And I didn't know, like I said, how you happened to come across it. Because to be honest, I hadn't really heard about it till I had one of the first students I had came through, Lewis Barnett, about 20 years ago. That was the first time and I knew John for years before that. I just wasn't familiar with it. So, but it was definitely a good program. So it helped get you going.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved my time there. Dana really, by the time I was an intern, had been taking interns for a number of years. She ran a really tight ship. It was a well-oiled machine. I learned so much. Pretty much everything that I know about how to do field work, I learned from Dana Bethea, who was running the field programs by the time I was there. And I learned a ton from John too. And it really, it's what got me into sharks, and it's what springboarded my career. And most of the connections that I have made in the field since then can kind of be traced back to that origin point at the Panama City lab.
So you went on from there, and you've gone on to do your PhD at university, and obviously you must like it quite a bit because you've been there for a while now, and you're still there actually, based there. We have students come on here, and some like to move around where they do a master's, go somewhere different for a PhD, and go somewhere different for a postdoc. Besides being just loving the area and enjoying the university setting there, did you have any grand plans when you started your master's there that you were going to stick it out there as long as you have, or?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly didn't know that this is how it was going to unfold. There's some personal life reasons that have kept me here too. Now, my husband has a good job, and that makes sense. When you're trying to piece together kind of the short-term contract life that is graduate school and then postdocs, it's easy to, if you can make it work to stay in one place, it definitely makes other aspects of life a lot easier. But I also, I have two really great advisors now, I guess more PIs, but Andy and Greg are incredible to work with, and it's tough to want to leave when you have such a good team around you. And there was one other postdoc in my lab who's done kind of a similar trajectory of sticking around postgraduate degrees. And so that it was never the grand plan to begin with, but I'm not the only one following that model in my lab. So I'm not alone.
Yeah. We'll get on to some of the more shark stuff in a second, but how'd you happen to get into striped bass?
Striped bass are part of what's paying the bills right now, which I appreciate. It's been a really fun project to work on, though, because the first fish that I ever caught as a kid was a striped bass, and
cool.
So, and I'm working on striped bass now in the same places where I grew up catching them. With my grandpa and my mom. And so that has been a really fun sort of full circle moment in my career that I wasn't actively chasing necessarily, but our lab got some funding to look at post-release behavior and mortality, since that fishery is largely catch and release. And so it's where things have taken me for now, and I'm enjoying it.
And when you look at the projects you do or the projects you want to do, obviously you're staying at UMass for a reason. You're doing some pretty cool projects, whether they're coming up to pay the bills or they're coming up to interest you. What drives you to pick up a new project, or to kind of just be like, oh, this would be kind of cool to see? Like, what is there like a basic sort of ecological question or some sort of question that kind of drives you to pick up a new project, whether they be sharks or striped bass or anything else?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things that really excite me. Obviously, the biologging or telemetry aspects are really interesting to me. So the striped bass project, which we also have a master's student in our lab that really is leading that, Olivia Dinklacker, uses accelerometers to look at behavior post-release. Oh, cool. And then my dissertation and master's work used acoustic telemetry and some satellite telemetry. I think in terms of questions, I've always been really interested in kind of applied conservation and management needs. And so I've done some work looking at residency and habitat use in marine protected areas. My dissertation focused on shark depredation, so shark interactions in recreational fisheries, which is something that is kind of gaining increasing traction and noise, especially on the East Coast and particularly in Florida. So I worked with great hammerhead sharks and Atlantic tarpon for that in the fishery in the Florida Keys. So I think I always want to be able to have a real conservation application to my work. And a lot of the work that I do is also in collaboration, either with anglers that are involved in the fishery or managers, so that what we're learning is kind of like directly transmitted to those people that need it the most.
Right. I like that.
Yeah. Now you've worked on, besides the stuff you're doing there, you worked on sawfishes in Florida. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because they're obviously a very critically endangered species, and there's a lot of interest globally on that. Could you talk a little bit about some of the stuff you did there?
Absolutely, yeah. The Sawfish Project is really near and dear to my heart, and whenever anyone asks me what my favorite shark is, I always take a deviation and say a sawfish, and they're not really a shark; they're more of a ray, but they're super cool.
They're a flat shark. They're a flat shark.
There we go.
Flat sharks. Trying a different marketing style.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So the Sawfish project that I was working on was sort of juvenile nursery area habitat assessment. And so once a month, we would go down to Everglades National Park, and we had certain areas within the park and then just adjacent to the park where we would do a standardized fishery independent survey. And the goal was really to, catch as many little baby pups and juveniles as we could, to give them a dart tag and a pit tag and be able to identify them and understand how many are around and the habitats that they're using. And at the time, we couldn't do acoustic transmitters on them. They are able to do that now with the renewed ESA permit, which is super exciting. So they're getting a better idea of movements, but our understanding of movements was really just from Mark and recapturing those sawfish with external tags. And I got to be a part of that project for 3 field seasons, which was really, really great and special. There aren't very many people that have gotten to handle sawfish in that way. So yeah, I loved being on that project. If I could get back to sawfish, I would be very happy.
Yeah.
I mean, you might have to live in Florida if that's the case.
I might.
It might be worth it though to work on the sawfish. That would be pretty cool. So you've done that. You worked on sawfish down there. So you've worked on, when you went back, what were some of the primary species you worked on, like for your master's and PhD?
Yeah, so my master's was with 4 different species: tiger sharks, lemon sharks, nurse sharks, and Caribbean reef sharks. And we were trying to understand what habitats and the residence time that they were spending in a marine protected area called Buck Island Reef National Monument in St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands, which is actually one of the oldest marine protected areas in the United States, but it wasn't established for sharks. It was established to protect the coral reefs there, and then also there's sea turtle nesting beaches on the little island that's in the center of the MPA. So it wasn't made for sharks, but we wanted to know if that MPA was providing any level of protection for sharks. And we were able to find that all of the species spend more than 50% of their tagged days at liberty within the MPA. So that was pretty exciting.
Oh, that's interesting.
For a place that was not designed with sharks in mind at all.
Right.
And then for my PhD research, I worked with great hammerhead sharks in the Florida Keys, looking at their broader movement patterns and migrations back and forth between the Keys and points farther north in the US, but also looking at fine scale movements and interactions in a channel called Bahia Honda, which is a site for a pre-spawning aggregation of Atlantic tarpon. And it's really quite heavily fished. So there are a lot of interactions between the sharks and anglers there.
Now, this research you're doing, is this all part of your PhD, but is it strictly through the university, or are you working with NOAA Fisheries or the sanctuaries? Who's this involved? I'm just curious. I was curious who else you're involved with.
Yeah, so for my PhD, all of the field work was done by us, but in closely collaborating with Bonefish and Tarpon Trust, which was funding a large Atlantic tarpon migratory pattern study through our lab. And then I was funded personally by the Dr. Nancy Foster Scholarship. So a lot of my results were communicated directly to the National Marine Sanctuary System, but I wasn't actually out in the field on sanctuary boats or anything like that.
Okay. And this was all done pretty much down in St. Croix, the Virgin Islands?
So that work was in the Florida Keys. The work in St. Croix is directly with the National Park Service. So the Park Service manages that MPA since it's a national monument. And we go out on their boats directly to fish, which has been really great. They put in tons of effort to help maintain the acoustic array that's out there. And we have some ongoing projects happening with them as well, which has been really fun. I've kind of taken that acoustic tagging of the tiger sharks and brought it into what's part of my postdoc now, adding a satellite telemetry component to look at connectivity between the protected areas that are in the U.S. Caribbean there.
Well, that'll be interesting.
So what was it like when you start working with these large sharks? Did you sort of just jump in, or were you working with anyone else that kind of showed you what to do, so you keep all your fingers and arms and legs together?
Yeah, I'm lucky that I started out working with juvenile sharks because the first shark I ever touched was a lemon shark that was, probably like 2 weeks old. It was small. And I was so afraid that it was going to bite my finger off. I was kind of terrified of it, to be honest. But I got to learn how to handle sharks when they're much smaller and you can kind of bend them to your will. And from people that had been handling sharks for decades. And so then when I started, graduating up to these bigger sharks for my master's and my PhD, I got to do a lot of my fieldwork with Greg Skomal, who obviously he's been on the podcast. People probably know Greg. Greg really does a lot of white shark work.
Yes.
But has worked with all kinds of different species throughout his career. And so he really started out as the chief shark wrangler and has taught me a lot about how to handle them safely.
Yeah. I had to ask this kind of when I'm pretty sure Greg had the similar experience when I started out in the 80s, is that it was just like, well, there you go. Good luck. And it was like, there wasn't really anybody to give you any kind of guidance. Actually, I know for myself, fishermen were really helpful because they knew how to handle the big sharks to get rid of them and stuff, or, get them and stuff. So I just and I realized things have changed a lot, but I just was curious how, because some of those species you're working, particularly the tigers and the hammerheads, they get quite large, and just that experience when you first start handling them, it's like, that's big. That's a big shark, and they're really, really strong and powerful to handle with them. So you got some good experience. Have you had a chance to work with white sharks at all?
Not really directly. I've been out and helped out on the boat a few times when they've needed an extra set of hands and things like that. So I've gotten to see them, which has been really fun. But I've not led any white shark research or anything like that.
Okay.
Have you tagged one?
I'm the one that gets to remind Greg that there are other shark species out there that are cool too.
The daily reminder, right?
The daily reminder. Yeah. Do you have much association? Do you much with the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy much? Because they're in the same area there?
Yeah, they are. One of my best friends works for them, but I'm not directly affiliated with them. So I'm friendly with a lot of the biologists there.
Of course.
But, yeah.
Well,
I'm sure it's a small world when you get into that area with sharks, and even in the Massachusetts area.
Yeah,
it's a small
for sure.
So I have to ask, did you work much with the NOAA Fisheries lab there in Narragansett?
No, I know Michelle because she left the Panama City lab shortly before I started there. So Michelle Passerati and I have known of each other for a while, and then we're able to meet in person at an AES meeting a few years back. But I'm yet to do stuff with the Narragansett lab. I would love to hopefully have that in my future at some point.
Okay. Yeah. No, I was just curious. Yeah, since like Andrew just said, it's a very small community there. Everybody tends to know everybody, and you kind of stumble into each other a lot of times. You'd mentioned all the stuff you're doing in Florida and the Keys and St. Croix, which are all like, well, I don't know about Florida so much, but the St. Croix sound like is a really nice, pretty tropical area to go do some work, which is always nice goal to have, to work somewhere nice. So I didn't know if you hadn't mentioned anybody up in the Northeast there that you had much to do with. So as you're going along with this in these different types of projects, what's kind of the different sort of things you're looking for? Like when you've worked with like these hammerheads and the tiger sharks. Could you talk a little bit more about some of that research you're doing with those?
Yeah, so the Hammerhead project was really exciting. It started because a postdoc in our lab was running a study of Atlantic tarpon migratory patterns in the Florida Keys. And so their goal was to tag 200 tarpon with acoustic telemetry tags. And they achieved that goal. So they were doing tons and tons of tarpon fishing. And through doing that, they were spending a lot of time with the charter fishing guides down in the Keys. And they were sort of increasingly hearing these grumblings and concern about how sharks more and more often were coming up and eating their hooked tarpon before they were able to get them to the side of the boat. And the tarpon fishery in Florida it's all recreational. It's almost entirely catch and release, except for a small handful of trophy harvest tags that are sold every year. And they're rarely used. So they're bought by people that are trying to break a world record and need to keep a tarpon. So they're very infrequently harvested. And so if these sharks are eating these fish that are going to get released, that could be the largest piece of mortality that's happening in this fishery, and it's unquantified. And so these guides were getting really worried about that. And I really just happened to be sort of the right person in the right place at the right time. I knew I wanted to go down the path of a PhD, and this project was presenting itself. And I was the person in my lab at the time that was doing the shark work. And so I could just sort of jump into pursuing funding for this project. And so we had those 200 tagged tarpon. I tagged 18 great hammerheads in this channel, Bahia Honda, where there's a big pre-spawning aggregation. It's thousands of tarpon come to this area underneath of a bridge that connects two keys that goes across the channel in April or May of every year. And it's a place that people can go very reliably to try to catch a tarpon. And that's been a well-known thing for decades. So there's a lot of fishing pressure underneath of this bridge. And so part of what I did was I sat on the bridge and I watched tarpon fishing for over 200 hours of my life. And I saw in April and May of one tarpon fishing season, and I saw over 400 fish get hooked. And of those, the ones that were fought for a substantial amount of time, about 15% were eaten by great hammerhead sharks. And so landing a tarpon is really difficult. They jump up, they shake their heads, they try to spit the hook. They're also fishing under a bridge, so you can hook a tarpon and almost immediately have it wrap the line around the bridge pilings and just break off.
Oh, wow.
So that happens a lot in the first minute of the fight.
Right.
But when you get rid of those fish that get lost almost immediately, about 15% of the ones that are really fought in that channel get eaten by hammerheads. So that's not the worst percentage in the world. It's not 75% of these fish, but tarpon, similar to sharks, live for decades. It takes them a while to mature, and they grow slowly. So these are fish that are coming to aggregate to spawn, and they're probably a lot of them get eaten before they're able to reproduce. So you can think about how that might add up over time. So part of it was a tarpon conservation kind of question that I was interested in answering. But we also wanted to understand how these sharks might be changing their behavior in response to how the tarpon were moving in the channel. And so we were able to show that the tagged hammerheads shift where they spend their time in the channel based on the direction of the current, which corresponds to the direction that people drift their boats while they're fishing. So they're kind of moving to set themselves up to be in a place where they can take advantage of these hooked fish. And then I was able to sort of piggyback off of having these tagged hammerheads to look at, well, when they leave the channel, where are they going? So I could explore movement patterns within the Keys, and then more broadly, seasonal patterns of movement as they leave the Keys and go up the coast of Florida and come back.
Any estimates like how many of the great hammerheads were hanging around that area?
Yeah, so I don't have a solid answer, but it's more than we expected. So something that question was something that we were interested in, and we wanted to understand if, this was like one or two hammerheads that are coming into the area and have figured out that this is a way to get an easy meal, or if it was a lot. So in my first year of tagging, actually, what I was doing was putting big, like 4-inch cattle tags that were different colors on the tops of their dorsal fins. And I was working with the fishing guides that fish under that bridge every day. And I was up on the bridge watching the fishing too, to see if we were seeing tagged individuals come back and eat tarpon again and again throughout the season. And we only saw one actually do that. And most of the sharks that we caught were untagged. Most of the sharks that I saw eat tarpon were untagged. And so the answer is more than 18, because that's how many I tagged. But it was a pretty low sort of recapture rate for our visual survey there. So it's a good number.
And I'm betting if people went, I don't know if they could dive around there, but if they probably went dive, no one ever probably sees a great hammerhead when they're actually in the water. It's only when the tarpon are around and somebody hooks one that they seem to show up.
Yeah, exactly. So diving in there is a little bit of a precarious situation because the current is pretty high. You have to time it right around the slack. But we had an acoustic array in there, so we needed to dive on the receivers, and nobody ever saw a hammerhead in the water there. So they're pretty elusive individuals.
Yeah. I think that's the case with a lot of sharks that people don't realize, and the reason because you have that interesting situation where they come in when they're hooked to the tarpon. But I wouldn't be surprised. I think a lot of times people never see the sharks until there's something attracts them in there, and yet they're around. You just don't see them until I guess they want you to see them or whatever. So you've been are you still going down to Florida pretty regularly doing the field work down there?
No, so that ended. This is actually the first spring in 5 years that I haven't been down there, which has been this past spring. So that was really kind of strange. But I defended my dissertation in July of last year. So that for the time being is kind of the end of the Keys project. I have some ideas that I maybe would like to pursue in the future if I can find funding for it. But for now, I have said goodbye to the hammerheads.
You've mentioned funding a few times now, and again, looking at your resume, you've had a lot of awards and nominations and things like that. How hard is it for a graduate student to, are you applying for your own funding, or is this, I know the awards are something different. Sometimes you apply for them, sometimes you're nominated for them. But is this something that you're actively seeking for each project, and you're getting the experience in applying for these grants and funds?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that my experience with pursuing funding has been a little bit different from other graduate students, but for the most part, past my master's degree, I have brought in a substantial amount of the funding to fund my dissertation work and parts of my postdoc. And so yes, I started actively pursuing funding because my lab didn't have the ability to support me for the PhD work. They had the desire to keep me, but we needed to figure out how we could get that done. And so I started writing grant proposals when I was supposed to be finishing my master's thesis, with the permission of my advisors. And fortunately, that funding came through, and so I was able to pursue the PhD and build on on some of the projects from my master's, like I mentioned with the satellite tagging for the tiger sharks, and then start this new project in the Keys, which also built off of some existing funding that we had for that tarpon work. But yeah, I actually have discovered that I enjoy grant writing. I think it's fun.
That's gonna be the promo for this episode. Is I enjoy. You'll get a job right off the bat.
Oh dear. I love that. I think it's fun to like dream up new ideas and think about what you can do within sort of the limits of what your funding is maybe going to be able to give you. And yeah, I find that part of science exciting to kind of think about the possibilities and put it together.
I don't think I've ever heard anybody say, I find grant writing exciting. That's going to be the headline for your podcast. So. I find grant writing exciting.
Oh dear.
But have you ever had, and you can answer this if you'd like, but have you ever gotten rejected for funding? Because that's part of the grant writing process, right? And seeking funds it's not easy. I mean, it's a very difficult thing. Can you tell us, in terms of like how you persist to continue to find it, even though, sometimes you get rejected for that funding?
Yeah, for sure. I have absolutely applied for way more things that I haven't gotten than things that I have gotten. I think, there's still rejections that happen that really knock me down. Yeah. But it gets easier the more you do it. And you start to sort of realize that there's an aspect of it that isn't personal at all. Like at some point, you're competing with a bunch of other people that are also really, really good at coming up with cool ideas to do science. And so some of it is almost a little bit of luck at a certain point. And the more I kind of tell myself that, the easier it gets. But I think the important thing is to just apply. You're never going to get the money if you don't try to get the money.
That's true.
And you never know what might come to be if you give it a shot. Yeah. And so I applied for the NSFG RFP, I think 3 times and never got it. I applied for the Nancy Foster once, got feedback, which was great.
Yeah,
they're a proposal that gives you feedback. And so I was able to kind of use that to understand what exactly they were looking for, make my proposal better, try again, and I got it that time. And that's what let me pursue my PhD. So I think, you're never going to feel like you deserve to get the money. So just try and maybe you will.
And what is there something that you find that's different when you do get it as opposed to when you don't? Or does it just basically it comes down to the different funding agency and the foundation and the granting agency?
Yeah, I think sometimes I have, you just find that sort of perfect combination of your idea fits in really well with whatever the request for proposals is, or whatever the nonprofit agency looks for in grants. So I definitely have gotten lucky, I guess is the right word there, where things have lined up really well. Certainly, I think that working on sharks has a bit of a wow factor to it as well, if you're applying for something that isn't just like a shark-focused organization.
Right.
Certain places you could have a little bit of a leg up just because you're working on something really charismatic and that people are interested in, and sometimes that they lend you to be able to tell a good story, just because sharks are really cool, right?
Yeah,
so it's easier to be able to tell a good story about why you need to be doing this work when your organism is kind of inherently flashy.
But storytelling does kind of help with grant writing, right? You got to tell that story.
Yeah, it's all about thinking about how to convince people that have no idea about where you work or what you're doing or why it's important, why it's important.
Right.
And that, I think, is the sort of important thought process and something that I've worked really hard to hone
Yep.
As a grad student and postdoc.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah. So you still do with the now you got involved with the I'm a little interested in your involvement with the sanctuaries program, because we have out here in California the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. I've been involved with them many years ago, but I'm just kind of curious, how are they as far as supportive of the type of stuff you were doing?
They were great. The team that runs the Nancy Foster Scholarship is a really incredible group. They're largely in DC at the sanctuary headquarters, but they've always been incredibly supportive of my work, helped me with connections, both in Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary and then other local people that are involved with working with Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. So I really enjoyed working with them. I'm done with my time as a foster scholar, but I'm still in touch with a lot of people. I was able to have some other collaborative projects while I was doing my dissertation with the local aquarium in the Florida Keys Aquarium Encounters, and that all came from my connection with the sanctuary. Ben Daughtry, who is the president of that aquarium, is also very involved with the sanctuary and saw me give a talk about my work, was really excited about it, and that led to conversations and doing some fieldwork collaboratively with them with the Hammerhead tagging. And so,
cool.
Yeah, the sanctuary has been a great partner in this work.
And what's the name of the sanctuary down there in the Keys?
Florida Keys National Marine.
Oh, it is
National Marine Sanctuary. Yeah.
Florida Keys National Marine. Okay. I just want to make sure we got that out there. We're talking so much about the sanctuaries program there, we didn't even get to the name of the actual place. So now that you've just recently received the Jeannie Clark Award, how does that feel?
That was incredible. It's again one of those instances where, you know, you're not going to get it if you don't apply. So I got the email from AES. I'd seen some other people going to AES meetings, winning the Jeannie Clark Award when I was earlier on in my graduate career. And I just thought, you know, wow, like maybe someday I could join that really incredible group of women. And so my advisors nominated me and they asked me to submit a full application. And I did, and I fully anticipated that I was not going to get to join those ranks. I was completely surprised at the meeting.
Why did you not expect to get the award?
Well, you know, I still think of myself as like relatively early on in my career path, and you know, and maybe I don't give myself enough credit, but I was surprised. I mean, it's a really prestigious award. They don't give the award every year. I've been at AES meetings where they haven't given the award, so I certainly knew that was a possibility.
Right.
Yeah, so I was incredibly honored to get to receive an award with Jeannie's ranks, or Jeannie's name on it, and join those ranks.
And before that, you'd received the Samuel Gruber Best Student presentation as well.
Yes.
How was that? How long ago was that? Was it a couple years ago, or?
Yes, that was at the Spokane meeting. I couldn't remember how many years ago that was.
Okay, a couple years. Okay. Yeah, actually, because Jenny Bigman, who was the last recipient of the Jeannie Clark Award, she was a former student of mine as well there, and so it was kind of cool. I was supposed to go to that meeting, I couldn't make it there at the last minute, so it was kind of cool to see one of my former students get that award. And I presume, like, you're probably too young, but you probably never met Jeannie Clark or Sonny Gruber.
No, I didn't get to meet either of them, unfortunately. I've heard great stories about both of them, but especially Jeannie. I know that she's been very kind to some of the women that have been my mentors through my sawfish work in AES. So Dana Bethay, Tanya Wiley, and Sonia Fordham have all always had wonderful things to say about Jeannie, and really nurtured me as I've kind of gone through my shark journey as well. So they're paying it forward.
Yeah, no, I said she was a very. I knew her back when I was a master's student back at Moss Landing in the days there, and she was actually. I don't know if you noticed. I mentioned some of the little history stuff, but she was actually Gavin Naylor's main PhD advisor.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
That's crazy.
Yeah. She actually was. She wasn't a mentor. I got to know her back when I was a grad student. I'd stayed in touch with her over the years because she was. If you go back in the 80s and stuff, she was doing a lot of submersible work for National Geographic, and she was seeing six-gill sharks, which is what I was working on for my PhD. So I had I'd met her in person, and then I'd kept up correspondence with her for over the years, and she was always very gracious. I always had a very good relationship with her. But yeah, she mentored a number of other people like Gavin and some others as well. This is, of course, going way back into the day there as well. But yeah, she was I just wanted to add, she was a very kind person, and I had very good memories of her. Again, I didn't work with her directly, but I always corresponded with her, and if I asked her some questions on six-gill sharks, she'd always take the time to send me a letter. And this was back when you actually had to handwrite a letter before there was like people had computers and stuff. So those are very special to me. If I could share one quick story here, Jeannie Clark story. Back when I was doing my degree, there was an article in National Geographic. It was about 1986 that she said that in the caption said 25-foot six-gill shark. I was going, 25 foot, man, that's like way bigger than anything I've seen or heard anywhere around. I think about 16, 17 feet was the biggest at the time. So I wrote her a letter and said, and I knew her at that time. I said, wow. I said, did you verify? How well were you able to verify this thing was 25 feet? And a couple weeks later, I get this, and I still have this. I get this really nice, big picture that she took for National Geographic. It said basically from Hexanchus and Jeannie Clark at 2,000 feet. Thanks, Dave Ebert, or something like that. And it turned out that she wrote a letter with it that said the shark really wasn't 25 feet. It was more like 14 feet. It got a little exaggerated. Hope you understand. But it was a very kind letter she wrote to me, and it was one of those things you treasure in life. But that was the kind of person, I'm sharing that because that was the kind of person she was, that she just took it all very good. And I was just kind of curious, like, wow, this thing's really big. She's a very good sport about that type of stuff. And I still have that framed in my office at home. So it's very, very kind of cool. But I just wanted to share that because that was the kind of person she was as a person. And people like yourself didn't have a chance to know her. Just wanted to share that. So now that you have with the Jeannie Clark Award and everything, what are your future plans that you want to go into? You want to pursue academia and have your own lab?
Yeah, that's definitely the hope, would be that I'd be able to have my own research lab, be able to mentor graduate students and undergraduates, do some teaching and ask my own research questions and keep writing those grant proposals that I supposedly really love writing.
What type of research, like if you had your own lab, what would be the first research project you'd like to go for?
Ooh, the first research project. I'm really excited by the space that I've been able to kind of carve out with shark depredation. I think that well, not even I think, I know that is a really emerging and hot button issue. I know that people are calling the HMS NIMS managers about it on almost a daily basis from things that they have said to me.
Right.
People are really fired up about it. And so I think that depredation is kind of something that is going to vary in severity and how we maybe try to solve those problems from fishery to fishery, and kind of also from shark species to shark species that's interacting in those fisheries. So I think that there's a lot that can still be pursued there.
Right.
So that's definitely a line of questioning that I'd like to keep going down. But sort of more generally, I'm really excited about projects that can tell us a little bit more about spatial ecology of animals, whether it's sharks or other recreationally important fish species. Better understanding movement and behavior is really, I think, a guiding theme of my work.
Have you had a chance to advise or mentor any students to date?
Yeah, not advise per se, since I'm not a PI yet, but I've gotten to mentor a number of students. I had some really great undergraduate students that worked with me during my dissertation. One of them graduated in the middle of the pandemic and was trying to figure out how to navigate the sort of weird landscape of seasonal work when the world was shut down. And so they ended up getting to come out in the field and help me during my field season, which most of my field work was during spring semesters. So normally that wouldn't have been able to happen, but it was really exciting to get them out in the field with me. And he's pursuing his PhD now at University of Maine. I'm super proud of him. And I work with a master's student and a PhD student in my lab now on their various projects, one of which is the striped bass project that I talked about a little bit earlier. So I really love getting to be out in the field with people that are still kind of cutting their teeth on field work and learning new things. I love being in the field in general, but I also find it to be very fun to get to kind of be part of those early field experiences when everything is new and exciting, and that kind of I feed off of that energy of excitement.
Yeah. That's terrific, Grace. I gotta ask. It's been a really wonderful interview with you, and we hope you come back again. But I got to ask you before we go here, what advice would you have for young students that are just starting out?
I think my biggest piece of advice and something that has served me is just be persistent. So things might not come together right away the way that you think or want them to. I didn't necessarily want to take 2 years between my undergraduate and my master's degree to go work, but I didn't get into any graduate programs fresh out of my undergrad. And in the end, doing those internships and working as a field tech actually had me way more prepared for graduate school down the line. And, I wanted to go into a PhD program, started as a master's student, got there anyway. Yeah. So I think there is a lot of rejection in this field, and that's something that you need to kind of just steel yourself against. But if you keep pushing through it, I feel like half of it is just being persistent and not giving up on that dream.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's great. That's really good advice. I think people, you just need to, it's definitely a field you need to have a thick skin and be persistent. And if you want a friend, get a dog.
They are great friends. I've got one of those.
Yep, that's really good.
Definitely are.
Good. Well, Grace, thank you very much again for coming on this, and congratulations on receiving the Jeannie Clark Award. And we wish you all the best in getting your lab. Get your own personal lab up and going.
Absolutely.
And please come back again in the future, and we'll catch up on what you've been doing. Okay?
I'd love to. Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Grace, for joining us on the Beyond Jaws podcast. What an interview. It's unreal to see, the people that we have on. A lot of times, Dave, when we have people on, they've been in the business for, just like yourself, 35 plus years. And then we have people who are what seems to be just starting their careers, but they're already so well established in terms of the amount of things that they've been able to accomplish, the amount of projects they've been able to do. And Grace is no exception to that rule. She is someone who's been able to, study small-tooth sawfish. She's been able to study tarpon, shark depredation. She's been able to do quite a bit in such a short span of time. I can just imagine what she's going to be able to accomplish over the next 20, 30, who knows, 40 years in the industry. What are your thoughts on today's interview, what she's been able to accomplish so far?
Well, it's kind of cool, Andrew, having people on like Grace early in their career like this, is that hopefully 20 years from now, they'll be able to pull up this episode, or we'll remind them and see what they had to say back in 2024, what they were projecting. Cause it's they're at that great time in your career, when you're starting out and you have so many roads you can go on, and Grace is no exception. She's had a lot of broad background in her options and where her career working, with sawfish, with tiger sharks, with, turtles, and just all kinds of different backgrounds and experiences working with Greg Skomal and with white shark stuff. So it'll be interesting to see where she winds up in 5, 10, 20 years from now. Whereas you have people that are, like Greg Skomal or myself and others that are kind of towards the latter part, we can reflect on what we've done. But it's be interesting to hear someone like Grace in a few years where they've actually been able to go with their career. So it was really exciting. I love having people on like Grace against one of these really early career rising stars in the field. We've had we've had a number of them on this year.
Yeah,
quite a few. We've had a number of really outstanding early career people on there, and again, it'll be really fascinating to see how where they wind up in a decade or more from now.
I mean, that's the beauty of doing this podcast, is seeing what people have already been able to do in their careers that they've established for quite some time, and then watching some of the people that are coming up that dreamed about being shark scientists or fishery scientists, and then been able to kind of go back and forth between, like, especially in Grace's case, going between fisheries and shark science and going back and forth. And I think it's really interesting to see people do really well and excel within this field, giving that inspiration to people who are listening to this, who may be just starting out their careers, being like, I can do this too. This is something that can still be done, not just by people who have done it, 35, 40 years ago, but people who are doing it now and continue to do that, and their past and how, like, their challenges and some of their successes that we talk about. And I think that's what I love about doing this podcast, and sort of to get to know the people who are doing it. Everybody we've had are very humble in doing their work, very proud of their work, and looking forward to doing new things, and really focusing on the questions at hand of what they want to find out and what they want to learn about sharks or about fisheries. And I think that's what really is the great spirit of science, right? Is figuring out these questions. Like, Dave, your question, not to speak for you, but your question is like, how many sharks can we find? Can we find sharks that have been extinct before? Are they extinct? Are they not? Like, where are these sharks, and how do we find them? I just love that aspect. It really inspires me to sort of look at different ways to do marine science and conservation, and to continue to say, hey, what questions do we have that we can move forward on? And I think that is that's what people like Grace bring to the podcast and bring to science, and I think that's what's really important.
Right, and that's the thing that's really I like about our podcast, and that we let the people give it their story in their words, so they can tell. So it's not being orchestrated or whatever. Not that it would be, but it's like, but they can just tell about their journey, their story, how they got to where they are now. And it's interesting. We have people on from different stages in their career, from an early career person like Grace. They got people like myself and others we've had onto the show, like we mentioned, Greg Skomal, that have been around, and Lisa Natanson, some of these people that were around, and people in the middle of their career, and just kind of, and they can, again, it's told in their own words, and that's what's so neat about Grace. And especially, I get excited when we have some of these young people on like Grace, because she can see where, she can tell her story, where she's at, and hopefully it'll be an inspiration to other young people starting out in their careers to hear 100%. Hear how someone like Grace was able to get to where she is, and then hopefully we'll plan to have Grace on again sometime in the future and kind of hear where she's at and how it's going.
I can't wait. This is going to be a lot of fun. We'll have her on because she's going to, obviously, next time we have her on, she's probably going to be up to 10 more projects that we're going to want to find out more about, knowing her. So that'll be great. It was great to have Grace on. We'll put all of her links that we have in the show notes. And Dave, if people want to get a hold of you, how would they do so?
The best way is on social media is a Lost Shark Guy on Instagram, Lost Sharks Guy on X, and Lost Sharks on Facebook. It's the best way. Come on and follow along on the journey, the place what I'm up to, and please go to our YouTube channel, Beyond Jaws Podcast, and subscribe and catch the stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Those links are all in the show notes. One thing to look out for too, if this is going up a little later, but Dave's going to be away and he's looking for lost sharks. And if you want to really follow his journey and what he's looking at and what he sees, I highly recommend you follow him on Instagram or on his social media that he just mentioned, because this is going to be the time to watch what he's up to. And I think it's really interesting, talk about like going to fish markets and looking in different places. You're going to be going, where are you going? Like, can you name a couple of places that you're going?
Well, I'm going to be starting off in Northern Australia with a good friend, Pete Kine, and his crew. And we'll be traveling around looking for sharks in Northern Australia. And then we're on to Timor-Leste, which is also known as East Timor, which has never been explored before. So that's going to be exciting. And then we'll be on to Indonesia, to several locations within Indonesia. And then I'll be winding up in Singapore. So I'm going to be hitting a number of places, and hopefully I'll have a lot of cool stuff to post on Instagram for everyone.
Absolutely, and I'm sure you will, and I look forward to seeing it. We're going to miss you. Well, of course, by the time this airs, you're going to be back, and we're going to be already recording more episodes. But yeah, like I said, everybody, if you want to see what Dave's up to and how to look for lost sharks, that's what you do. Go follow at Lost Shark Guy on Instagram and all the other platforms. And thank you again, Dave, for doing this. And thank you, Grace, for joining us and talking about your career so far. We really appreciate it. And for everybody, thank you so much for listening. And if you know someone who wants to go into shark science or shark conservation, just interested in sharks at all, share this episode with them, share other episodes, share the whole show with them. We grow based on your recommendations. So if you love this show and you want somebody else to listen to it, please feel free to let them know about it. We really appreciate it. But thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast. From Dave and I, we really appreciate you. Have a great day and happy conservation.